ETH2 architecture is really, there's this kind of central system chain called the beacon chain where all the validators live, and where the shards kind of connect back into and are controlled via this core consensus. And this, as y'all know very well, launching this is a pure proof of stake chain. It's a single chain, and what it does is it primarily manages validators. It comes to finality, and will eventually link in shards. And launching a single chain proof of stake in production is a non-trivial task. So this is divided out into its own phase we call phase 0. And that's really the bootstrapping of this like new consensus mechanism. A phase 1 is the creation of a number of shard chains. Right now, the current specification is 64 that live in parallel to this core system chain, in which validators that are in this beacon chain are randomly sampled and distributed across these shards at any given time, building them and also making claims about the availability and validity of the data of those shards, linking them back into this core consensus beacon chain. When shards are linked back into this core consensus, they kind of become more final, and they become like the beginning of that shard chain. So like if I'm going to go find the head of the shard chain, first I go to the beacon chain, I find the latest crosslink as we call it, and then I walk the chain from there. So this, in phase 1, there's actually no execution, smart contracts, that kind of stuff. This is actually purely working on this data availability problem, trying to have 64 shards in parallel and be able to make claims about the availability of a ton of this data. And kind of unify it in a single consensus. From there, the intention is to take the existing Ethereum chain, and instead of having its consensus be the current proof of work consensus, to have its consensus be the ETH2 consensus as living as one of these shards. At that point, you have existing Ethereum living under this consensus and 63 data chains. What we call a phase 2 is adding execution and accounts to all of these chains, such that you have now like 64 what feels like Ethereum today living in parallel and being able to communicate through this single protocol. So again, phase 0, kind of bootstrapping the core consensus into this thing we call the beacon chain. Phase 1, tons of data in the form of these parallel shard chains. Phase 1.5 is the integration of Ethereum mainnet today into this new consensus mechanism. Phase 2 is adding state and execution to all of these shards. There's plenty of fun stuff we can kind of do along the way, and we're phased in such a way that we can kind of like manage the complexity of specifying and building all this and releasing all of this in kind of a sane way, because each phase is a substantial engineering effort.